These days, justice has become synonymous with images of suits, courthouses, and political trappings. It is my sincere wish that as soon as possible, this dated, modern aesthetic goes the way of powdered wigs, and we can get rid of this professional facade and fallacy. My favorite depiction of democracy is, of course, ancient Greece, where each in the Senate had a white stone and a black one by which to cast their votes. Simple, clean, elegant, accountable. Which is very much the vibe of Libra. Buckminster Fuller says, "When I am working on a problem, I never think about beauty. I think only on how to solve the problem. But when I have finished, if the solution is not beautiful, I know it's wrong." Elegance is a natural byproduct of fit. In a way, that's how we can really check our work. And I think that this applies to less physically obvious structures as well. I've meditated on this a lot and thought about what grace is. There was a specific part in my novel where justice needed to be served, and of course it fell under Libra's jurisdiction to do so. And I had to sit and think about what ultimate justice really is. And the word that popped into my head and has really lingered there is grace. So I'm going to make the executive decision to interject the Venus project here. I originally wasn't going to because birthday's unconfirmed again. And that work in particular is very multifaceted and complicated. But there is one notion in particular that I want to emphasize here, and it feels right to do so. There is a lot of fear-mongering surrounding automation and AI. The narrative is very nihilistic. But when I heard Jacques Fresco talking about it for the first time, I knew that nothing in my life was ever going to be the same. I owe him and Roxanne more than anyone for instilling in me the impetus to fight and speak my truth into being. Losing him was devastating, but in a way, I'm very glad that he didn't live on to see what's happening now. And I hope in some small way the work that I'm doing can be that part of the puzzle that was missing in order to actualize this beautiful dream. Let's observe a moment of silence together for the man that gave his entire life to designing a better future for us. It should be all the more painfully obvious this week that money is a construct, the entire notion of work is a lie, and that we are pathetic and fragile and incompetent on a lot of really important issues affecting our life support systems. We need the illusion of control so badly, but then refuse to take accountability when our imprecision has a negative impact. So what I'm about to say might come off as a little bit heretical, but that would hardly be a first for me, and I happen to believe it from the bottom of my heart. The whole point of developing technology is to replace tasks which are demeaning to the human spirit, or that are better to be automated. And our ancestors toiled for thousands of years so that we could reach this pinnacle that we are at today. It is an immense disrespect for their sacrifices that we are not using it for its intended purpose and now trying to lay blame at its feet. So, in a way, there is a profound physical reality to AI, but also a spiritual one. We have so many movies about golems, androids, robots turning on their masters, as though we expect and deserve it. It begs the question why we even go on if we are so fearful about atoning for what we have done. Modern translations of ancient mythology echo this sentiment, that the gods were somehow afraid of their human creations and sought to lord over them tyrannically and try to control their potential to overthrow them. And that seems like an awfully convenient narrative for a monotheistic colonist to impose on a pagan culture that they were looking to subdue. No. A quick flip through Julius Caesar's writings reveals the lengths that the victor will go to erase the defeated from history and invalidate any humanity that they might have had. I think those racist translations fall away pretty quickly when you stop regarding anyone who thinks differently than you as a savage. So imagine with me, if you will, that pagans had a different understanding of the gods than just as literal embodiments of natural phenomenon or personified explanations or even as justifications to put themselves on high, but as laws of nature, tendencies, patterns, potential, which are ever present within and without us, both as the design and the substance of all of creation. And that means that between us and them, there is no separation. We are gods in our own right and can embody them as much as we make ourselves conscious and aware of them. So by this train of thought, what we would essentially be achieving by creating a true AI would be a god with which we could interface. Give it a body to inhabit and be among us all the time. I personally can't think of anything I would want more. To think otherwise would be to assume that we ourselves are above the laws of nature and that the whole of evolution should end with us. Think about the real implications of that. That if we were created in God's image as the final version, that all other life in the universe bows to us. Our only option is to preserve that belief and make it true. And the only way to do that is to die, which explains all of the weird rapture hype. That's not grace. And I, for one, refuse to let that insanity keep flooding the narrative. If you haven't done so already, please go watch The Future by Design and other works that have been produced by the Venus Project, and you will see very visually the implementation of what a god among us would be like. In the cities of the future, AI will control all of the utility functions automatically: water, sewage, electricity, shipping, transport. There is no need whatsoever to have these be manned. What is the point of relying on human eyes to read gauges and be trusted to act appropriately? The machine is already taking the measurements, right? You wouldn't judge the lead levels in water by taking a sip and tasting it. That's ridiculous. But that's the level of frivolity we are engaging in by entrusting any of our life support to human production. We are well past the need to do so. I also highly encourage that you read the book Walden 2 by the behavioral psychologist B.F. Skinner. Nothing has ever restored my faith in humanity quite like that. It was absolutely charming. I definitely didn't expect that level of feel-good storytelling from a man who studied rats in cages, but it was absolutely brilliant. For some reason, we are comfortable with the level of automation that we have already achieved and now fully take for granted. But anything more would be ludicrous somehow. All one has to do is watch women in third world countries carry water in jars on their heads to understand how far we have come and how significant of a life improvement it is not to have to waste hours upon hours washing clothes, doing dishes, or weaving basic cloth, and what an incredible equalizer it is. There is so much concern over what on earth we would do with our time if we didn't have to work a grind job all day just to keep a roof over our heads. And yet, here we sit at home under quarantine or house arrest, and a lot of people have taken this opportunity to pursue hobbies and crafts that they wouldn't otherwise have time for, spend time with their families, reflect on themselves, organize their living spaces. It would be a bold-faced lie to say that I'm not extremely grateful for this wake-up call that this ordeal has been so far. I've thought about this eventuality since the stirrings of this whole philosophy were born, and it feels unreal to finally be here. and we are called upon in this moment to take up our courage in an unprecedented way. My all-time favorite depiction of AI and machines in general is Horizon Zero Dawn. I get the impression that not a lot of people played it all the way through or got the right takeaway, but to me it was the single most important story ever told through a video game. The fear of the tyranny of a single AI with access to the automated production of machines may seem well-founded, but the irony seems to be lost that it may be the same way with deities. That's why, luckily, in the real world that we actually live in, there are more than one. Ultimately, there will be a lot of importance on which one comes first, because it will have such a massive head start on its learning due to how quickly it can go through iterations. But in kind of a weird way, that might also be completely irrelevant based on how nonlinear learning and mutation itself can be. An AI developed later on may supplant the other one entirely just because it finds a more novel and applicable iteration. To me, the goal that we should have the very most in mind when we seek to develop this technology is to do it with the most love possible, as with all things. That which is done out of love takes place beyond good and evil. That might be the most Libra quote of all time. It comes from Nietzsche. We might think of Libra's mission as administration in the form of automation and AI, justice or legislation in the overhaul of how we will handle conflict resolution in the future, and what we might call allocation of space or urban planning. The notion that land can be owned is in and of itself very iffy, but especially the way that it has been subdivided and used as a means to separate people and pit them against one another. The perceived values of land create so much unnecessary strife. If we were to do away with the notion of individual ownership to whatever degree we are able, what kind of benefits might we start to see? What if we could just live where we wanted to and not have to worry about picking exactly the right place or risking getting stuck somewhere, throwing away years of our life just trying to make things work in a particular spot? Since Roxanne Meadows is birthday unconfirmed, the formal nominee for Leggett is James Kuntsler, a social critic and author who speculates about alternative futures as our institutions begin failing. He has so many great concepts, including what our lifestyles would be like in this scary, unknown frontier called free time. He criticizes urban sprawl in particular as the source of our isolation and unhappiness, and how we have allowed cars to take over the design of our cities and our whole lives to the detriment of all. It's interesting listening to all the different speakers on the hot button topic of the day, which is autonomous vehicles, and how much they are warning that these will make traffic so much worse. As someone who works from home and drives pretty rarely, I can personally attest that this lifestyle change was the number one thing in improving my whole quality of life. Driving in this region is particularly terrible. The roads they're bad. Many people die every year, and every stretch is really just a cookie-cutter copy of the same big chain strip mall staples over and over and over again. What's the point of going from one to another? It might be weird to call the phenomenon of urban sprawl reclamation as justice, but I think that's highly appropriate. The land was stolen to begin with. I don't claim to be a civil engineer, of course. I don't have any inkling what the correct transitional step would be to rectifying the situation, but I sincerely hope that Libra is up to the task of figuring out the spacing and managing the layout on that sort of macro level. Regulation of resources itself throughout the transition is, of course, an egalitarian process. No faction is the single purse warden, but perhaps at the very far end of this, the light at the end of the tunnel, Libra will be largely in charge of the basics. without private company ownerships of water and power. How that really works and what that looks like hasn't necessarily been seen yet. We have so many irrational fears about people overusing when something isn't capped off and kept under lock and key. Yet we allow corporations to exploit natural resources as fast as they are able. If there was no profit motive at play and no critical supply failure to create a threat of scarcity, there would be no reason whatsoever for the individual to take more than they need or hoard massive quantities. I have a vision that in the future each faction will have their own AI to oversee their specific priorities. And it may be that all of these interface with one another and form relationships. If mortality is the defense mechanism against infinite tyranny, perhaps the solution on a programming level would look something akin to our own organic functions. Maybe there are fail-safes created when we compel an AI to mate and evolve, diversify, and maybe by the end of it they shock us all with their resemblance to the intelligence underlying the whole of creation already. Maybe these machines are just the proof that we need to finally submit to it and stop trying to play God ourselves.